Yeah, so we have this myth in our culture around sexual compatibility that you have to test drive the car to know if it's a good relationship. And even more than that, there is this myth out there that how am I going to know what I want once I'm married, once I'm committed to someone for the rest of my life, if I haven't tried a bunch of different things? And usually for a lot of people that means multiple sexual partners, multiple partners where I've tested and experimented with different things. And there's a lot of pieces to this myth, and one of the first and most important ones is the research doesn't back that up. We have a lot of good empirical research now that suggests that multiple sexual partners, multiple physically intimate partners that I have in my life increases my risk of dissatisfaction and actually divorce later on in life. And we think what happens is that rather than learning what I like, what that can sometimes do in my marriage, in my long-term relationship, is it's giving me a lot of information to think about what I don't like with my spouse and say, well, you don't do A, B, and C that these previous partners did, and I'm more likely to dwell on that, more likely to think about dissatisfaction. There isn't a real element here that ignorance is kind of bliss, at least from the research standpoint. The other piece to this, though, is that when we talk about sexual compatibility and the importance, again, for a lot of people, what they're worried about is well, what if I'm in this relationship for 40, 50, 60 years with this person and the sex is bad? And I've condemned myself to this life of bad sex, and how awful does that sound? Again, implicit in that assumption is that sex is purely a physical thing, that my partner will do things to me or I will do things to my partner that will make sex physically pleasurable or not pleasurable, as if that is the only reason why we engage in physical intimacy. Again, rather than having a more holistic view of sexual intimacy that incorporates the relationship and our emotional connection, spiritual connection, and our physical connection, and then realizing that I could connect with someone very strongly emotionally and spiritually during physical intimacy, and maybe from an objective outside standpoint, from a physical standpoint, the intimacy isn't that great, but that's intimacy that's going to power us through and bring me more joy and satisfaction in my life than someone that the physical side is really strong, but there's not much emotional or spiritual connection. And that's another reason why we think we see the research that leans in this area away from having multiple partners, is we know that the physical pleasure side of intimacy tends to gradually decline as people get older. And that by the time you're in middle age and later age of adulthood, when we're in our 60s and 70s, not that we're not engaging in physical intimacy, because those couples are, but it's a very different type of physical intimacy for a lot of those couples. And again, most of that satisfaction is not being derived from the physical aspects of what we're doing. It's much more about the connection that we're making during that physical intimacy. And so if I'm going into the dating process thinking more about all of those elements and not just, I need to get enough experience that I know what I'm doing and I know what I like, in a lot of ways it's a very selfish way to approach relationships. It's very much about me and what I like and what I'm getting out of the relationship, instead of thinking more about that connection and that relational element of sex. And we know that that's where the strongest relationships come from, that oftentimes have very solid sexual intimacy. Solid, stable couples have good, solid, and satisfying sexual intimacy, but it's often not based on the physical pleasure elements alone. It's this more holistic approach to intimacy that doesn't necessarily have to do just with the compatibility. Now, having said that, what I would say to a lot of young couples is that doesn't mean you completely ignore the intimacy aspect of your relationship when you're dating. You can certainly and should be paying attention to general things around just how important is intimacy in the relationship. It's not uncommon to have young couples where one person is just a very much more physically oriented person. They show love and feel love through physical touch, and another person that just doesn't. And that might be good information to know in a relationship, that if I'm someone that I know I'm going to really value physical intimacy, that's an important part of how I feel cared for and loved in a relationship, and I'm dating someone that, just doesn't really care that much about that, it might not be a reason to break up with that person, but it might be something to be thinking about as I'm thinking about long-term marriage or a long-term committed relationship. And again, even there, it's not really about the physical piece. It's not really about are we compatible or not. It's more about who am I as a person, and am I finding someone that is going to make a healthy relationship